All right, class, welcome back to our daily read aloud. We are reading Pax these days. We ended in the middle of a chapter last time, and it was a Peter chapter. Now, we know what's going on with Peter. He ran away from home. What is he trying to do? Angie, what's his goal?
Looking for Pax, and he ended up in a baseball field, and then I don't know if he's actually he said he was playing with trucks or something, and then the teacher would say that, but I think he's just going back, and I don't think he's actually doing it.
Yes, you're right. So he did talk for a little while about playing with cars. And what that was all about, after his mom died, he went to someone called a therapist. And a therapist, it's not really a big deal. I have seen a therapist, okay? A lot of people have seen a therapist. You just go and talk to them. Because sometimes it's easier to tell a stranger what's going on than someone you know.
Yep.
So he would go talk to this therapist, and she would try to get him to talk about his mom, but how did he feel about talking about his mom? Madeline?
Not really good.
Yeah.
Also, I went to something like that, I think, because my stepdad, he hit me, my old one, and then and he left, then so I had to go see somebody to talk to.
Mm-hmm. So you understand that. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons for therapy. So he went to therapy. He does not really want to talk about his mom. Sometimes it's just too hard. So he would go and take a piece of candy and walk out, and that was his signal, I'm done with therapy today. Chloe?
My dad's a therapist.
Okay.
Okay, nice.
So what's going on with Pax? Hayden?
He has to be sent away because his grandpa can't, Peter's grandpa can't handle a wolf in his house.
A fox, yes. But who did he just meet? Cadence? Two other foxes. So we met Bristle first, which is a vixen, a female fox. And she is with her little brother, who they are calling Runt, because he's the little guy. Okay? Now, they just invited Pax to come back and stay with them for the night because it's going to storm, but she said, that's it, because you smell like humans, and we don't like that. Okay? Eric?
So do they know it's their sister and brother?
We have kind of gotten that idea, yes, because we know that Bristle had to raise Runt because something bad happened with traps. We don't really know all the details yet.
Wait,
Oh, hold on.
asking you. I was like, when do the foxes know?
I think so, but we'll get more into that story. Yes, Emma?
I think the female fox, I think Pax and Nahor are siblings because
Oh.
their mom died too.
Okay, so they had similar birth stories, right?
Oh, no.
Okay, shh, Quinn. All right, so we left off in the middle of a chapter, and we were reading about Peter. Okay, we were talking about his therapist. Okay, and then he just found Pax. All right, I'm going to start back a little bit later. So this is right after the therapist thing. A few months later, Peter had gotten Pax. He'd come across a fox run over by the side of the road near his house. So soon after watching his mother's coffin lowered into the ground, he'd felt an unshakable need to bury the body. As he'd looked around for a good place, he'd found the den filled with 3 stiff, cold kit bodies and one little ball of gray fur still warm and breathing. He'd tucked Pax into his sweatshirt pocket and brought him home and said, not asked, said, I'm keeping him. His dad had said, okay, for a while. The kit mewed piteously all through the night, and hearing him, Peter had thought that if he could visit the kind-eyed therapist again, he'd smash those toy cars together all day and all night forever. Not because he was angry, just to make everybody see. Thinking about Pax made this old anxiety snake tighten around Peter's chest. He needed to get moving again, make up some time. The practice was breaking up now, boys loping in from the field, shedding equipment as they streamed past the dugout. As soon as the field was clear, he dropped from the bleachers, pulled his backpack down, and hitched it over his shoulders. Just as he set out along the diamond, though, he saw the shortstop. Right? And that was the boy that he was watching a lot, right, as they played baseball. Peter hesitated. He should take off, try to blend in with the stragglers leaving the school grounds. But the rest of the team had left this kid to bag up the equipment and walk back alone, and Peter knew how that felt. He picked up a couple of balls and handed them over. "Hey." The boy took the balls with a cautious smile. "Hey." "Nice play. The last liner, that ball had hair." The boy looked away and scuffed at the dirt, but Peter could see he was pleased. "Yeah, well, the first baseman made it look cleaner than it was." "Nah, you planted that ball. Your first baseman would be lucky to catch a cold by himself. No offense." The boy gave Peter a real grin. "Yeah, coach's nephew. You play?" Peter nodded. "Center field." "You new here?" "Oh, I don't live here. Peter nodded his head vaguely south. "Hampton?" "Yeah, Hampton, right." The boy's face closed. "Scouting before Saturday's game? Jerk." He spat and walked back to the dugout. So this boy thinks that Peter goes to a rival school and he's sitting there watching them practice so he can go tell his team like who's good and all that stuff. As they left the school grounds, Peter congratulated himself on his quick thinking, covering his runaway tracks. But somehow he felt kind of bad anyway. Somehow he felt lousy, actually. He shrugged the feeling off. What was it his dad said about feelings? Something about a quarter and a cup of coffee, and checked his watch. 4:15. He'd lost over 3 hours. Peter pressed faster, but when he came to the town square again, he crossed to the... Whoa. The hand sanitizer fell. It's okay.
He'll get it later.
Peter pressed faster, but when he came to the town square again, he crossed to the opposite side of the hardware store and forced himself to walk at an even pace, past the library, past a bus station, past a diner. How do you think he wanted to walk out of town, instead of at a slow, even pace, Josiah?
Fast.
Fast, right, to get out of there? But that would look suspicious. Then he counted off 1,000 steps before he risked lifting his head. When he did, he checked his watch again. 4:50. His grandfather was probably packing up his stuff now. Peter imagined him walking to his rusty blue Chevy, fitting the key into the ignition. And with that image, his anxiety struck, knocking the breath right out of him. He scaled a low wooden fence and dropped into scrubby brush. He pushed in a good safe 30 feet until the saplings rose up taller than he was, until his anxiety let him breathe right again, before turning to parallel the road. So if you're going to parallel the road, you're going to walk along the road in the same direction. You're just off in the bushes so no one can see you. It was rougher going now, but 15 minutes later he reached it, the highway. Peter shadowed the entrance ramp, crouching low. Then, at a break in traffic, ran down the culvert, scaled the chain link fence, and dropped to the other side, his heart beating hard. He'd made it. He loped into the trees, keeping an eye out for a likely place to cut west. And in just a few minutes, he found one. A dirt road running perpendicular to the highway. That means it made a T with the highway. Well, not much more than an old wagon path, to be honest. But it was heading in the right direction and would be easy walking, even at night. He turned in. For a short while, the trees beside him grew denser as he walked, and only bird calls and squirrel rustlings broke the silence. Peter realized he might have seen the last of civilization for a while. The thought lifted him. But a few minutes later, the road turned a corner and began to run along an old pasture dotted with gnarled fruit trees and ragged bloom. A stone wall bordered the field, and a low barn stood at the far corner. There were no lights on in the barn, no car or truck beside it. Still, Peter's heart crashed. The barn looked freshly painted, and some of the roof shingles were the raw pink of new wood. This was the road to someone's home. Worse, it might lead to a bigger road the atlas had been too old to show. In any case, it wasn't a shortcut across the hills. Peter dropped his pack and sank into a narrow jog in the stone wall, exhausted and starving. He tugged his boots off and peeled down his socks. 2 bad blisters throbbed on each heel. They were going to kill when they broke. Peter dug out his extra pair of socks from the bottom of his backpack and worked them over the first pair. He rested his head back against the rough stone, still giving off a little warmth from the day's sun, which was now hovering just over the line of trees, bathing the field in a peach-colored glow. He pulled the raisins out and ate them one at a time, taking small sips of water in between. Then he opened 2 packets of string cheese and took 4 crackers from the sleeve. He ate as slowly as he could, watching the sun over the orchard, surprised to find that he could actually mark its sinking movement. How had he lived 12 years and never known about sunsets? Peter laced his boots. Just as he started to rise, he caught sight of a deer, which bounded into the orchard from the woods beyond. He held his breath as the orchard filled, 14 deer in all. They began to graze, and a few nibbled delicately at the low branches of the trees. Peter squatted down, and the closest one, a doe with a spindly spotted fawn beside her, turned her head to look directly at Peter. Peter raised his palm slowly, hoping to let her know he meant no harm. The doe moved between Peter and her fawn, but after a while she dipped her head into the grass again. And then the clear twilight air was split by the screech of a saw biting through wood from behind the barn. So is he by himself?
No.
Someone's there. The herd startled in unison and peeled away into the darkening woods, their white tails flashing. Before she bounded off, the doe sent another look straight at Peter, one that seemed to say, "You humans, you ruin everything." Peter took off. Back at the highway, half the cars had their headlights on now, and it seemed that they were all trained directly on him. He ducked off the road. The ground there was spongy and smelled of peat. He was just debating about risking the flashlight when his foot sank with a splash. He grabbed an overhanging branch and pulled himself out, but it was too late. He could feel cold swamp water seeping into his boots. Peter cursed. Not bringing more socks? Another mistake. It had better be the last of the trip. All right, didn't he have an extra pair of socks?
Yeah.
But what did he just do with them? Hayden?
Put them on.
So now he has 2 pairs of socks on because he has blisters, and they all just got wet, which I'll tell you in the woods is not a good thing. You got to keep your feet dry. And then, clambering back to higher ground, he made another, much worse mistake. His right foot caught on a root, and he fell. He heard the bone break. A soft, muffled snap. At the same time, he felt the sharp stab. He sat panting with the stunning pain for a long moment. Finally, he pulled his foot free and unlaced his boot, wincing at each motion. He eased down the wet socks and saw what made him gasp. His foot was swelling so fast that he could actually see it. Like you can see your foot getting bigger as it's swelling. That's fast. Peter rolled his socks back up, nearly crying out at the pain it caused, then gritted his teeth to work his foot back into the boot before it could swell anymore. He crawled to a tree and pulled himself upright. He tested his weight on his foot and nearly collapsed again. The pain was far worse than anything he'd felt before. It made the broken thumb feel like a mosquito bite in comparison. He couldn't walk. And that is where we stop today. All right, see you guys later.